The blood-red horizon swallowed the setting sun as Katherine Lowery clutched her infant daughter to her chest, the sound of approaching horses stirring the dust around the auction block where she stood. Tears streamed down her face as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the yard, describing her as if she were no more than livestock. Strong, healthy woman, good for cooking, cleaning, and child-rearing, comes with the baby too for the price of one. It was the summer of 1875 in the harsh territory of New Mexico, and Katherine had never imagined her life would come to this. Just 21 years old, she had been the wife of a failed prospector who had gambled away everything they owned before abandoning her with mounting debts and a 3-month-old baby. His creditors had claimed her as payment, and now she stood trembling as men called out their bids. $200! Shouted a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth and cruel eyes. $250, called another, a ranch owner Katherine recognized as having a reputation for working his help to death. The baby whimpered against her chest, sensing her mother's fear. Katherine tried to soothe her, whispering promises she had no power to keep. Her once fine dress was torn and dirty, her auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. She had been beautiful once, before hardship had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed the light in her green eyes. 300. The new voice cut through the crowd, steady and determined. The bidding continued, growing more heated as the price climbed. Katherine kept her eyes downcast, unable to look at the men who were deciding her fate. Finally, the auctioneer's gavel struck with finality. Sold, for $550 to Mr. Hayes Zimmerman. Katherine raised her eyes to see who had purchased her and her child. A tall man stood at the edge of the crowd, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore simple clothing, worn jeans, a dusty blue shirt, and a leather vest. A revolver hung at his hip. As he approached, she could see he was younger than most of the bidders, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and intense blue eyes that studied her carefully. "Come along," he said, his voice low but not unkind. He didn't touch her, but gestured for her to follow him to where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited. Katherine hesitated. "Please, sir, what are your intentions with us?" Hayes Zimmerman glanced around, noticing the curious onlookers. "Not here," he said quietly. "We need to get moving before nightfall." With little choice, Katherine followed him. At the horse, Hayes lifted a small bundle and handed it to her. "Wrap your baby in this. It gets cold at night." The bundle was a soft woolen blanket, cleaner than anything Katherine had touched in weeks. Surprised by the gesture, she carefully swaddled her daughter, murmuring softly to keep her calm. Hayes mounted the horse in one fluid motion, then reached down to help Katherine up behind him. "Hold on tight and keep the baby secure," he instructed. "It's going to be a long ride." As the horse began to move, Katherine clutched the stranger's vest with one hand while cradling her baby with the other. The auction yard fell away behind them, and they rode toward the open desert and mountains beyond. Katherine's thoughts raced with fear and uncertainty. Had she simply exchanged one form of servitude for another? What did this man want with her and her child? They rode in silence as the landscape changed around them, the town disappearing into the distance. The baby had fallen asleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Finally, when they were far from any settlement, Hayes spoke. "My ranch is another day's ride from here. We'll make camp soon and continue at first light." "Why did you buy us?" Katherine finally asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Hayes was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he hadn't heard her. When he finally answered, his voice was tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. "I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. No woman and child should be sold like cattle." "So what am I to you, then? A servant? Katherine couldn't bring herself to speak the alternative aloud, though the fear of it had haunted her since the moment the auctioneer had put her on the block. Neither, Hayes said firmly. You're free to go wherever you want once we reach my ranch. I can give you money, supplies, whatever you need to make a fresh start. Or you can work for me, properly employed with fair wages, until you decide what you want to do. Catherine's arms tightened around her baby. His words seemed too good to be true, but there was something in his tone that made her want to believe him. Why would you help strangers this way? She asked. Hayes's shoulders tensed beneath her hand. Let's make camp, he said, avoiding her question. Your little one probably needs tending to. As the last light faded from the sky, Hayes found a sheltered spot near a small spring. He helped Catherine dismount before tending to his horse. Catherine sat on a fallen log, nursing her daughter while Hayes gathered wood for a fire. She watched him warily, still uncertain of his motives. Once the fire was crackling, Hayes retrieved some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, along with a canteen of water. He offered them to Catherine first. Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Catherine accepted the food gratefully, realizing how hungry she was. As she ate, Hayes kept a respectful distance, busying himself with setting up a simple camp. What's her name? He asked suddenly, nodding toward the baby. Emma, Catherine replied, surprised by his interest. Emma Rose. That's a fine name, Hayes said softly. How old is she? Just over 3 months. Catherine stroked her daughter's downy head. She's all I have left in this world. Hayes nodded, his expression solemn. You should get some rest. I'll keep watch. He offered her his bedroll, insisting she take it when she protested. Catherine settled down with Emma nestled against her, watching as Hayes sat with his back against a boulder, revolver within easy reach. Despite her fear and uncertainty, exhaustion soon claimed her, and she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. Catherine awoke to the soft gurgling sounds of Emma and the smell of coffee. She opened her eyes to see Hayes kneeling by the fire, warming a small pot of what looked like oatmeal. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. Good morning, Hayes said, noticing she was awake. I hope I didn't wake you. Catherine sat up, adjusting her clothing and checking on Emma. No, she's usually my alarm at this hour. She paused, searching his face in the early light. I never properly thanked you yesterday. Whatever your reasons, you saved us from a terrible fate. Hayes nodded, passing her a tin cup of coffee. No thanks needed. It was the right thing to do. As they ate a simple breakfast, Catherine studied her rescuer more carefully. In the morning light, she could see he was handsome, with strong features and those intense blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. There was a weariness about him, too, a sadness that spoke of his own hardships. Tell me about your ranch, Catherine said, hoping to learn more about the man who had saved her. It's not much compared to some spreads, Hayes replied, but it's mine. About 100 acres of decent grazing land with a small creek running through it. I've got a modest herd of cattle and a few horses I'm breeding. The cabin needs work, but it's solid. And you run it alone? I have a hand who helps with the cattle. Old fellow named Josiah. Lives in a small cabin on the property. Hayes hesitated. My wife used to help with everything else, but she's been gone 3 years now. The sadness in his voice made Catherine's heart ache with recognition of shared grief. I'm sorry, she said softly. Hayes nodded once, then stood abruptly. We should get moving. Still have a long way to go. They broke camp efficiently, and soon they were back on the trail. Catherine once again holding Emma securely while seated behind Hayes. The landscape grew more beautiful as they rode, with red rock formations and distant mountains framing vast expanses of desert dotted with sage and cacti. How did you end up on that auction block? Hayes asked after they'd been riding for several hours. Catherine hesitated, the shame of her situation making her throat tight. But something about Hayes made her feel she could trust him with the truth. My husband William was a dreamer. We came west from Missouri because he was convinced he'd strike it rich in the silver mines. She sighed. He found nothing but a talent for cards instead. I was already with child when things got bad. He'd come home drunk, empty-handed, making bigger promises each time. Hayes listened silently as she continued. After Emma was born, he disappeared for 2 weeks. When he returned, he told me he'd lost everything: our savings, our mule, even the deed to our little house. The next morning, he was gone again, this time for good. His creditors came shortly after, saying William had offered me as collateral on his debts. That's not legal, Hayes said tightly. Little is legal or illegal out here unless you have the money or power to make it so, Katherine replied bitterly. The sheriff wouldn't help a woman with no family and no means. Said I should consider myself lucky they didn't separate me from my baby. Hayes's jaw clenched. No one should be treated that way. And yet it happens every day, Katherine said softly. Why did you really buy us, Mr. Zimmerman? The truth this time. Hayes was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. My wife, Clara, and our son died in childbirth. I couldn't save either of them. When I saw you and your daughter on that block, with those men bidding like you were nothing. He trailed off, his shoulders rigid beneath her hand. You felt you could save us instead, Katherine finished for him. Something like that, he admitted, though I know it doesn't undo what happened to Clara. They rode in silence after that, each lost in thoughts of what they had lost and what the future might hold. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Hayes pointed to a valley below. That's my land. We'll be home before sundown. Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest at the word, home. It had been so long since she'd had a place to call by that name. The ranch came into view as they descended into the valley, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nearby, a small creek winding through pasture land where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand, but it looked well-tended and peaceful. An older man emerged from the barn as they approached, waving a greeting. Hayes returned the gesture. That's Josiah, he told Katherine. Best ranch hand in the territory and the worst cook you'll ever meet. Despite her exhaustion and uncertainty, Katherine found herself smiling at Hayes's attempt at humor. When they reached the cabin, Hayes dismounted first, then helped Katherine and Emma down. The baby had awakened and was fussing softly. Josiah, this is Katherine Lowery and her daughter Emma, Hayes said as the old cowhand approached. They'll be staying with us for a while. Josiah touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Madam. Little miss. His weathered face creased in a gentle smile. Good to have some life around this place again. Hayes led them inside the cabin. It was simple but clean, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a stone fireplace. A hallway led to what Katherine assumed were bedrooms. You and Emma can have the back bedroom, Hayes said, showing her to a small but comfortable room with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt. It was Clara's sewing room, but I cleared it out a while back. Bathrooms down the hall, we've got a pump inside, which is a luxury out here. Katherine stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Mr. Zimmerman. Hayes, he interrupted. Please. Hayes, she amended. I don't know how to thank you for all this. No need. He shifted uncomfortably. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning about arrangements. After he left, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Emma, who had finally fallen asleep after nursing. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. Whatever Hayes's reasons for helping them, she and Emma were safe for now. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, they had shelter, security, and the kindness of a stranger who had risked everything to save them. Morning came with the sounds of movement in the kitchen. Catherine changed and fed Emma before venturing out to find Hayes at the stove, awkwardly attempting to cook breakfast. The sight of the tall, capable cowboy struggling with a simple pan of eggs made her smile. "Need some help?" she offered. Hayes turned, looking almost relieved. "Please, I warned you about my cooking." Catherine gently shifted Emma to one arm and took over at the stove with her free hand. "It's the least I can do." They fell into a comfortable rhythm, with Hayes setting the table while Catherine rescued breakfast. When they sat down to eat, Hayes cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what I said yesterday, about you working here for wages." He met her eyes directly. "The truth is, I could use the help. The house has been neglected since Clara died, and Josiah and I are run ragged with the cattle and horses. If you're willing, I can offer you room and board plus a fair monthly wage to help with the housekeeping and cooking." Catherine considered his offer. It was more than fair, far better than she could hope for elsewhere as a single mother with no references. "I accept," she said, "but I want to do more than housework. I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I know about gardens, chickens, even basic veterinary care for livestock. I'm not afraid of hard work." Hayes's expression softened with respect. "We'll start with getting you and Emma settled, then see about expanding your duties. Josiah will be happy to have someone else handle the chickens, they terrify him." Catherine laughed, surprised by the unfamiliar sound. "A cowboy, afraid of chickens? Says they have devil eyes?" Hayes replied with a hint of a smile. "He'd rather face a stampede than collect eggs." This easy conversation continued through breakfast, and Catherine felt some of the tension leave her body. Perhaps this arrangement could work after all. Over the next few weeks, Catherine settled into life at the Zimmerman Ranch. She took over the running of the household, bringing order to the bachelor chaos that had reigned. She planted a small vegetable garden behind the cabin, set up a laundry line, and began collecting eggs from the half-wild chickens that had been left to their own devices for too long. Hayes was true to his word about paying her fairly, and he was unfailingly respectful of her boundaries. He seemed almost shy around Emma at first, watching from a distance as the baby grew more alert and began to smile. Catherine noticed how his expression would soften when Emma gurgled or reached out tiny hands toward new objects. One evening, as Catherine sat on the porch mending one of Hayes's shirts while Emma slept in a makeshift cradle beside her, Hayes joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "The place hasn't looked this good in years," he said, settling into the chair next to hers. "You've worked wonders." "It's a fine home," Catherine replied. "It just needed a woman's touch." Hayes was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the horizon in brilliant oranges and purples. "Clara would have liked you," he said finally. "She was practical like you, always seeing what needed doing and just getting on with it." Catherine set down her mending. "Tell me about her?" Hayes rarely spoke of his late wife, and Catherine had been careful not to press. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, he seemed ready to share. "She was the daughter of a rancher 2 valleys over. We met at a harvest dance when I was 20, married a year later." His voice grew softer with memory. "Everyone said we were too young, but we knew our own minds. We built this place together, starting with just 10 acres and a handful of cattle." "She sounds remarkable," Catherine said. "She was." Hayes turned the coffee cup in his hands. "When she told me we were expecting a child, I'd never been happier. We had so many plans." He trailed off, the pain still evident in his voice. "I'm sorry," Catherine said simply, reaching out to touch his hand briefly. Hayes nodded in acknowledgement. "What about you? You've told me about how things ended with your husband, but not how they began." Catherine sighed, looking out at the darkening landscape. "William was charming, the son of our town's banker, educated back east. I was flattered that someone like him would notice someone like me. My father died when I was 16, leaving my mother and me with the farm and little else. When William proposed, it seemed like the answer to our prayers. You loved him, Hayes observed. I thought I did, Katherine admitted. But now I wonder if I loved the idea of him more than the man himself. The reality never quite matched the dream he sold me. Emma stirred in her cradle, and Katherine reached down to soothe her. She's growing so fast, Hayes commented, watching the baby. Too fast, Katherine agreed with a smile. Soon she'll be crawling, then walking. I'm not sure this house is ready for a mobile, Emma. We'll have to make it ready, Hayes said, his voice warm with something that made Katherine's heart beat faster. As the weeks passed, Katherine found herself watching Hayes with increasing interest. He was different from any man she had known, quiet but not cold, strong but never using that strength to intimidate. He worked from sunrise to sunset, taking pride in even the smallest improvements to the ranch. She began to notice other things too, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how gentle his hands were when helping her down from the wagon after trips to town, the deep rumble of his rare laugh when Emma did something amusing. For his part, Hayes seemed to be warming to Katherine's presence. He started joining her and Emma for longer periods in the evenings, sometimes reading aloud from one of the few books he owned while Katherine sewed or mended. He began asking her opinion on ranch matters, listening intently to her suggestions. One afternoon, a summer thunderstorm rolled in suddenly while Katherine was hanging laundry. Hayes appeared from the barn, running toward her as the first heavy drops fell. "Let me help," he called, grabbing sheets from the basket to bring them inside. They worked quickly, racing the rain, laughing as they became increasingly soaked. Inside the cabin, dripping water onto the floor, they stood facing each other, breathless from exertion and shared amusement. "You look like a drowned cat," Hayes said, his eyes bright with humor. "And you look like a drenched bear," Katherine retorted, pushing wet hair from her face. Hayes reached out, hesitantly tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief, but electric. Katherine felt her breath catch as their eyes met. The moment was broken by Emma's cry from the bedroom. Katherine stepped back, suddenly aware of her racing heart. "I should check on her," she murmured. Hayes nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll see to the horses." That evening, a tension hummed between them, a current of unspoken feelings. Katherine was acutely aware of Hayes's presence across the table, the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. After dinner, Hayes helped her clean up, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed dishes back and forth. Each brief contact sent a shiver through Katherine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "I'm riding out to check the north pasture tomorrow," Hayes said as they finished. "Would you and Emma like to come along? It's beautiful up there, and I packed a wagon so you wouldn't have to ride." The invitation surprised Katherine. Hayes had never asked her to accompany him on ranch business before. "We'd like that," she replied, trying to sound casual while her pulse quickened at the prospect of spending the day with him. The next morning dawned clear and perfect. Hayes had the wagon ready early, with a cushioned seat for Katherine and a special box lined with blankets where Emma could lie safely. The care he'd taken with these preparations touched Katherine deeply. As they traveled, Hayes pointed out features of his land with obvious pride: the creek that never ran dry even in summer, the natural shelter formed by a line of cottonwood trees, the distant mountains that marked the border of his property. "It's beautiful," Katherine said sincerely. "You've built something special here." Hayes glanced at her, then back at the trail. "It's still not what I'd envisioned. Clara and I had bigger plans." "Plans can change," Katherine said softly. "That doesn't make what you've accomplished any less meaningful." He seemed to consider her words as they continued toward the north pasture. When they arrived, Hayes helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Katherine felt warmth spread through her at his touch. They spread a blanket under a lone oak tree, and Catherine laid Emma down to kick and coo happily at the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Hayes checked on his cattle grazing nearby, then returned to sit beside them. "She seems to like it out here," he observed, watching Emma with a gentle expression. "She does. She's an easy baby, considering everything she's been through." Catherine smoothed Emma's wispy hair. "Sometimes I worry about the life I can give her. A child should have a father, stability, a proper home." "You're giving her all the love she needs," Hayes said. "That's what matters most." Catherine met his eyes. "Is it enough, though?" Hayes reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "It can be. With time, other things can follow." The touch of his calloused hand against hers sent Catherine's heart racing. She didn't pull away, instead twining her fingers with his as they sat in companionable silence, watching Emma and the distant cattle against a backdrop of endless blue sky. That day marked a turning point. Though neither spoke explicitly of their growing feelings, a new warmth characterized their interactions. Hayes began finding more reasons for Catherine and Emma to accompany him on ranch business. Catherine took special care with meals and found herself paying more attention to her appearance, using precious drops of rosewater saved from her previous life. In the evenings, they sat closer together on the porch, sometimes talking late into the night after Emma was asleep. Hayes told Catherine about his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, building a larger house, perhaps adding an orchard. Catherine shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, the mother she still missed, and her own hopes for Emma's future. Their hands would occasionally meet in these twilight conversations, fingers intertwining with increasing confidence. Once, Hayes tentatively placed his arm around Catherine's shoulders when the evening turned cool. She leaned into his warmth, savoring the solid comfort of his presence. Emma, now nearly 6 months old, seemed to thrive in the ranch environment. She had begun to sit up on her own and showed a particular fondness for Hayes, reaching for him whenever he entered a room. Catherine watched with tender amusement as the stoic cowboy melted under her daughter's gummy smiles. One evening, Hayes returned from town with a small wooden horse, intricately carved and polished smooth. "I thought Emma might like it when she's a bit older," he said almost shyly, placing the toy in Catherine's hands. "Hayes, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed craftsmanship. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Been working on it in the evenings in the barn. Wanted it to be special." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "She'll treasure it," she said softly. "As do I." Hayes met her gaze, his blue eyes intense with unspoken emotion. For a moment, Catherine thought he might move closer, perhaps even kiss her. Her heart hammered in anticipation. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should check on that new calf," he said, turning toward the door. Catherine watched him go, confusion mingling with disappointment. She was increasingly certain of her own feelings for Hayes, but his restraint left her uncertain of his. Did he see her only as an employee, a charity case he had rescued? Or was he, perhaps, still too bound to Clara's memory to consider loving again? These questions troubled her as she prepared for bed that night. She knew she was falling in love with Hayes Zimmerman, but she had no claim on him beyond the strange circumstances that had brought them together. If her feelings were unreturned, she would need to protect her heart and Emma's. The following week brought unexpected visitors to the ranch. Catherine was kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw 3 riders coming down the main trail. Hayes emerged from the barn to greet them. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, watching as Hayes spoke with the men. Their conversation appeared tense, with Hayes's posture growing increasingly rigid. When one of the men pointed toward the cabin, Hayes moved to block his view, shaking his head firmly. After several more minutes of discussion, the men rode away. Hayes stood watching them go, his expression troubled. When he turned toward the cabin and saw Katherine, his face softened slightly. "Who were they?" Katherine asked as he approached. "Cattlemen's Association," Hayes replied, climbing the porch steps. "They've been forming patrols to deal with rustlers in the area." He hesitated. "One of them recognized you from the auction in White Creek." Katherine's blood ran cold. "What did they want?" "To know why I had you here. What our arrangement was." Hayes's jaw tightened. "I told them it was none of their business." "But it bothered them," Katherine guessed, wrapping her arms around herself. "Frank Miller, the one who recognized you, he's a troublemaker. Thinks he can dictate how others live." Hayes met her eyes directly. "I don't care what he or anyone else thinks, Katherine. You and Emma have a place here as long as you want it." The protective intensity in his voice warmed her, but Katherine couldn't help worrying. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Hayes." "You're not the trouble," he said firmly. "Men like Miller who think they can own people, they're the trouble." Inside the cabin, Emma began to cry. Katherine touched Hayes's arm briefly before going to tend to her daughter, her mind troubled by this reminder that the world outside their peaceful ranch had not forgotten them. That night, Katherine was awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices. She quickly pulled a shawl around her nightdress and peeked out the window to see Hayes confronting 5 mounted men in the yard. The moonlight gleamed off rifles in their hands. Heart pounding, Katherine grabbed Emma from her cradle and slipped to the cabin door, opening it just enough to hear the conversation. "No right to interfere with a legitimate business transaction," one man was saying Miller. Katherine guessed from Hayes's description. "There was nothing legitimate about it," Hayes responded, his voice steel cold. "A woman and child aren't property to be bought and sold." "You bought them," another voice pointed out. "I bought their freedom," Hayes countered. "Now I'm asking you all to leave my property before this gets ugly." Katherine noticed that Hayes had his revolver strapped to his hip and that Josiah had emerged from his cabin with a shotgun, positioning himself to the side of the confrontation. "We're just suggesting you might reconsider your situation," Miller said smoothly. "A man living with a woman he's not married to, it doesn't look right. Sets a bad example in these parts." "My situation is my business," Hayes replied. "And if you're so concerned about what's right, I suggest you look to your own actions. Riding armed onto a man's property at night isn't exactly neighborly." The tension in the yard was palpable. Katherine clutched Emma tighter, fear gripping her heart. If anything happened to Hayes because of them. After a long, tense silence, Miller spoke again. "Just think about what I said, Zimmerman. Some folks around here have long memories. They might remember that your woman there belonged to someone else first." "She belongs to herself," Hayes said, his voice rising. "Now get off my land." The standoff continued for another moment before Miller signaled to his companions. They turned their horses and rode slowly away, their threat lingering in the air like gun smoke. As soon as they were gone, Katherine rushed outside. "Hayes!" He turned, his expression softening instantly when he saw her. "You should be inside. It's not safe." "I heard everything," she said, approaching him with Emma in her arms. "They came because of us, didn't they?" Hayes exchanged a glance with Josiah, who nodded once before returning to his cabin, giving them privacy. "Miller wanted to buy you at that auction," Hayes admitted quietly. "He was the one bidding against me, driving up the price. He doesn't like losing." Katherine felt sick at the realization of how close she had come to falling into that man's hands. "What do we do now?" Hayes gently touched Emma's head, then met Katherine's eyes. "We have options. We could leave. I have friends further west who could help us start fresh where no one knows about White Creek." He paused. "Or we could stay and fight for what's ours." The simple word ours sent a flutter through Katherine's chest. "This is your home," she said. "I don't want you to lose it because of us." "Home is more than land and buildings," Hayes replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Katherine, these past months with you and Emma." He trailed off, struggling to find words. "I know," she whispered, reaching to touch his face. "For us too." Hayes covered her hand with his, turning to press a kiss to her palm. The tender gesture nearly undid her. "Let's go inside," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, Hayes took extra precautions around the ranch. He and Josiah took turns keeping watch at night, and Katherine noticed Hayes checking his rifle and revolver more frequently. Despite the tension, life continued. Cattle needed tending, meals needed cooking, and Emma continued to grow and develop, oblivious to the dangers surrounding her. Katherine found herself treasuring each moment with Hayes, aware that their peaceful existence might be disrupted at any time. Their evening conversations grew deeper, more intimate, though Hayes still maintained a certain physical distance that Katherine both respected and regretted. A week after Miller's nighttime visit, Hayes announced he needed to ride into the nearest town to speak with the territorial marshal. "I want to file a formal complaint about the trespassing," he explained as they ate breakfast. "And I need to make some other arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Katherine asked, noticing something different in his manner that morning. "Legal matters," he said vaguely. "I'll explain when I return. I should be back by nightfall." Katherine worried throughout the day, jumping at every sound, keeping Emma close as she completed her chores. Josiah stayed near the cabin, his shotgun always within reach. "Don't you fret, Miss Katherine," the old cowhand reassured her. "The boss can handle himself, and I won't let anyone bother you here." Despite his reassurances, Katherine couldn't shake her anxiety. When the sun began to set with no sign of Hayes, her worry deepened. She had just put Emma down for the night when she heard a horse approaching at speed. Josiah was already on the porch, gun ready, when Hayes galloped into the yard. Katherine rushed outside, relief flooding her at the sight of him safe. But her relief turned to concern when she saw his expression, a mixture of urgency and determination. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted. "What's happened?" Hayes climbed the porch steps quickly. "Miller's gathered a posse. They're claiming I stole property that rightfully belonged to your husband's creditors." "That's absurd," Katherine exclaimed. "Even if that horrible arrangement were legal, you paid for it. They're saying the sale wasn't properly recorded, that I don't have proper title to." Hayes stopped, his face flushing with anger at having to speak of Katherine in such terms. "To me," Katherine finished for him, understanding the ugly situation. "So what happens now?" "We need to leave," Hayes said firmly. "Tonight. I've made arrangements with a friend who has a place near the Colorado border. We'll be safe there until this blows over." He turned to Josiah. "Can you handle things here for a few weeks?" The old cowhand nodded. "You know I can, boss. You just get Miss Katherine and little Emma to safety." Katherine's mind raced. "But your ranch? Your cattle? None of it matters if you and Emma aren't safe," Hayes interrupted, taking her hands in his. "Katherine, He paused, struggling with his words. "I can't lose you. Either of you." The raw emotion in his voice made Katherine's heart swell. "And we can't lose you," she replied softly. They moved quickly after that. Katherine packed only essentials for herself and Emma while Hayes prepared the wagon. They would travel by night when the heat was less intense, hoping to put significant distance between themselves and Miller's posse before dawn. As they prepared to depart, Katherine took one last look at the cabin that had become home over the past months. Despite the circumstances, she felt a strange sense of peace. She was leaving with Hayes, and somehow that made everything else secondary. Emma slept in her special box in the wagon, cushioned against the bumps in the trail. Katherine sat beside Hayes on the driver's seat, their shoulders touching as he guided the team of horses northward under a canopy of stars. "I'm sorry about all this," Hayes said after they had traveled for some time. "I thought I could protect you here." "You have protected us," Katherine assured him. "From the moment you saw us on that auction block, you've done nothing but keep us safe." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I went to town today for more than just the marshal," he admitted. "I spoke with a judge about getting legal documents drawn up." "What kind of documents?" Katherine asked, curious about his earlier evasiveness. Hayes kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Papers establishing that Emma is legally free from any claim by your husband's creditors. And—" he hesitated. "Papers making my ranch yours if anything were to happen to me." Katherine gasped. "Hayes. No, I couldn't possibly—" "Please," he interrupted. "Let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I realized something when Miller and his men showed up that night. I realized I'd do anything to protect you and Emma, and I realized why." He finally turned to look at her, his face illuminated by moonlight. "I love you, Katherine. I love both of you." The simple declaration, spoken so plainly under the vast night sky, filled Katherine's heart to bursting. "Oh, Hayes," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I love you too. I have for so long, but I wasn't sure if I could love again after Clara." He finished for her. "I didn't think I could either, but you showed me that the heart has room for more than one love in a lifetime. You and Emma brought light back into my world." Katherine reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers as they had done so many times before, but now with the full acknowledgement of what the gesture meant. "I don't want those papers," she said firmly. "I don't want your property if something happens to you. I want you, alive and well, building a future together." Hayes smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. "That's what I want too, which is why I had the judge draw up one more document." He reached into his vest pocket with his free hand, pulling out a folded paper. "I thought we might stop at the church in Silverton. The pastor there is an old friend." Katherine opened the paper with trembling fingers. It was a marriage license, needing only their signatures and a witness. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she looked from the document to Hayes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Hayes Zimmerman?" she managed to say through her emotion. "I am," he replied, bringing their joined hands to his lips. "I'm asking if you and Emma would do me the honor of becoming my family officially. I know it's sudden, and you might need time." "Yes," Katherine interrupted, her heart too full for hesitation. "Yes, we will marry you." Hayes stopped the wagon then, turning to face her fully. In the silver moonlight, his blue eyes shone with love as he leaned forward to kiss her for the first time, a gentle, reverent kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they parted, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find love again," he whispered. "Thank you for proving me wrong." Katherine smiled through her tears. "Thank you for saving us that day, for seeing us as people, not property." They continued their journey through the night, now not just fleeing danger but traveling toward a new beginning. By dawn, they had crossed into the next county, where Hayes's friend, a former Texas Ranger named Samuel, had a small ranch waiting for them. Samuel welcomed them warmly, showing them to a comfortable cabin on his property. "Stay as long as you need," he offered. "Any friend of Hayes is a friend of mine." After settling in and ensuring Emma was comfortable, Hayes and Katherine rode with Samuel to the small church in nearby Silverton. There, with Samuel and the pastor's wife as witnesses, they exchanged simple vows, promising to love and protect each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Katherine wore her best dress, the one Hayes had bought her for church services, with wildflowers in her hair. Hayes had shaved carefully and wore a clean shirt with his least worn jeans. It wasn't the wedding Catherine had dreamed of as a young girl, but as Hayes slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, another surprise he had purchased in town, she knew it was perfect. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor said warmly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Zimmerman." Hayes cupped Catherine's face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes again. When they turned to face their small audience, Samuel gave a whoop of approval that made them both laugh. They returned to Samuel's ranch as husband and wife, their hearts light despite the circumstances that had brought them there. That evening, after Emma was asleep in her makeshift cradle, Hayes and Catherine sat on the porch of their temporary home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Hayes said, testing the name as he drew her close against his side. "I like the sound of that," Catherine replied, nestling into his embrace. "And I think Emma will make a fine Miss Zimmerman until she finds her own husband someday." "Not for many, many years," Hayes said firmly, making Catherine laugh. Their conversation turned to the future, how they would handle the situation with Miller when they might return to their own ranch, the improvements they would make to the cabin to accommodate their growing family. "I was thinking we might build an addition," Hayes suggested. "Emma will need her own room as she gets older, and perhaps—" He hesitated, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Perhaps we'll need more room for more children?" Catherine finished for him, her heart warming at the thought. Hayes nodded, his eyes reflecting his hope for their future. "If you'd like that," he said softly. "I would," Catherine assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "Very much." That night, for the first time, they shared not just a home but a bed, discovering each other with the tender passion of new love built on deep respect and friendship. As Catherine drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, she marveled at the journey that had brought her from the depths of despair on an auction block to this moment of perfect happiness. 2 weeks later, a rider arrived at Samuel's ranch with news from Josiah. The territorial marshal had investigated Miller's claims and found them baseless. More importantly, he had discovered that the auction in White Creek had been illegal on multiple counts. The marshal had arrested several men involved, including the auctioneer and the sheriff, who had allowed it to happen. "It's safe to go home," Hayes told Catherine, relief evident in his voice. "The marshal wants to speak with you about testifying against the men who sold you, but he assured Josiah that no one will ever threaten your freedom again." Catherine clutched Emma, now able to sit up on her own and babbling happily. "Home," she repeated softly. "That sounds wonderful." They thanked Samuel for his hospitality and began the journey back to their ranch, traveling by day now without fear. When they crested the familiar ridge and saw the cabin in the distance, Catherine felt tears of joy sting her eyes. Josiah was waiting for them, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile as the wagon approached. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he called, tipping his hat respectfully. "The place wasn't the same without you." Catherine beamed at him as Hayes helped her down from the wagon. "Thank you for taking such good care of everything, Josiah." "Just doing my job, madam." The old cowhand looked at Hayes. "Everything's in order, boss. Cattle are thriving, and I fixed that leak in the barn roof while you were gone." "Good man," Hayes said, clapping him on the shoulder. That evening, after a celebratory dinner during which Josiah fussed over Emma like a proud grandfather, Hayes and Catherine stood on their porch, arms around each other as they gazed at their land. "So," Hayes said, "should we start on that addition to the cabin next week?" Catherine smiled up at him. "I think that would be perfect timing." "Oh?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Is there a particular rush I should know about?" Catherine took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "Let's just say Emma might need that room of her own sooner than we thought." Hayes's eyes widened, then filled with wonder as he understood her meaning. "Catherine, are we?" She nodded, her heart full of joy at his reaction. "Dr. Peterson in Silverton confirmed it before we left. We're going to have a baby, Hayes. With a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the nearby coop, Hayes lifted Katherine off her feet, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and kissing her deeply. I love you, he whispered against her lips. Both of you. All three of you, he corrected himself with a grin. And we love you, Katherine replied, her eyes shining with happy tears. Our protector, our provider, our love. Inside, Emma called out, ready for her evening feeding. Hayes and Katherine went to her together, a family forged through adversity but bound by love, proof that even in the harsh wilderness of the West, tenderness could flourish and second chances could be found. As Katherine nursed Emma while Hayes sat beside them, his arm around her shoulders, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. From the horror of being sold on an auction block to the joy of creating a family with this good, honorable man, life had taken unexpected turns. What are you thinking about? Hayes asked softly, noticing her thoughtful expression. How sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, she replied. If I hadn't been on that auction block, you never would have found me. Hayes's arm tightened around her. I would have found you somehow, he said with quiet certainty. Some people are meant to be together, no matter what stands in their way. Looking up at her husband's face, filled with love for her and the children they were raising together, Katherine believed him completely. Their story had begun in darkness, but they would write the rest of it in light one day, 1 year, one child at a time, building a legacy of love in the wild heart of the West.